Atheist Alliance International Podcast.
I don't make this stuff up.
You know, if you put Jesus Christ first, that he'll look after all your bills.
It's not fake, it's faith.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Atheist Alliance International Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Sylvester, aka Diogenes of Mayberry. And joining me this week is a former ex-Muslim, or I guess an ex-Muslim, not a former ex-Muslim, known as the Holy Humanist. So we have Nuriyah joining us. So just before we get started, I'd like to remind everybody to like and subscribe. So welcome Nuriyah to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So why don't we, when we get started a little bit, just tell everybody about yourself and who you are and what your channel is all about?
Yeah, sure. So, hey everyone, as Jason mentioned, my name is Nuriyah Khan. I have a YouTube channel called Holy Humanist, which I started a couple of months ago now. And as Jason rightly mentioned, I'm an ex-Muslim. So the purpose of my channel and to kind of speak out is just to obviously share my experience and the things that I've, kind of found out when I delved into religion, when I seriously looked into it, and to kind of highlight those issues and just reach out to as many women as possible and say, this is the reality of what is in our scriptures and your status as a human being in Islam. So I've just started my activism recently in English, and I've just kind of branched out to starting a channel in Urdu as well. So for all the Urdu Hindi speakers in the subcontinent, I'm going to kind of really push to move that channel along. I haven't done that much work on it yet, but just to give some context, I am a second generation British Pakistani. So I was born and brought up in the UK till I was about 9. And then I spent a large portion of my life in the Middle East. So most of my teenage years and most of my schooling was done in Saudi Arabia and Dubai. And it was only after kind of coming back to the UK, this is years after university, where I went through something and it kind of forced me to look into the scriptures more and delve into religion. So I did that when I got back to the UK and I was in a safe space and kind of dealt with everything, which I'm sure we'll unpack a lot more in this conversation. But yeah, so it was only a couple of years ago that I really thought, okay, you know what, I want to distance myself from this ideology completely. And I realized, oh, okay, on the internet, there's a whole barrage of people that think the same way as I do. Whereas beforehand, kind of I had no idea that, people could even leave Islam, or there was a term such as ex-Muslim, or if I even wanted to use it. But just to have kind of these open spaces, Twitter was really, really helpful for me. And I started kind of seeing this community and then reaching out to like-minded people and thought, you know what, this is insane work that they're doing, trying to dismantle this ideology and kind of bring it to the forefront and put the spotlight on it. And it's not hard to do in this day and age with the internet at our fingertips. So yeah, that's just kind of a weird back and forth background, but that's just to give you some context.
Sure. Okay. I apologize. I pronounced your name Nuriyah. It's Noria. So,
yeah, that's
right?
Okay. You're definitely not the first.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. But normally, before we get started on these, I always ask people to get their pronunciation right. So I apologize that I missed that with you. So okay. So
No worries.
when you were in Saudi and Dubai, were you a practicing Muslim then?
Yeah, so basically, I come from a Sunni Muslim background, and I'd say my grandparents' generation are very kind of conservative, and they really, really stick to religion, and it means a lot to them, and they pray 5 times a day, and they do all the things they're supposed to do. And then my parents are slightly more liberal in that sense, because I guess they kind of grew up in England, and they went to co-ed schools and that whole thing. So, and then they lived an expat life, and they gave us that kind of life. So I was always practicing in the sense that I believed Islam to be true with all my heart when I was living my entire time in the Middle East. Actually, when I was living in Saudi Arabia and Dubai, I was still quite young, and I was growing up as a teenager there. And before I'd actually gone to Saudi Arabia, when I was 9, I was wearing the hijab in the UK already, and I was going to mosque classes every day after school. So that religion kind of like in the formative years, the importance of religion had already like seeped in, and I fully believed it. I wasn't like, I never questioned it. And even at 9, like to be wearing a hijab when most people around me weren't, and they were actually asking me if I was sure that I really wanted to do this. And I just thought, they're a bit crazy. Like, do they not want to go to heaven because this is what we're supposed to do? So, ironically, moving to Saudi Arabia, because religion, I lived in a city in Jeddah, which is really only about 45 minutes away from Mecca, if there's no traffic. So you're so close to the holy city, and you can go there and you can do like, you know, the mini Hajj, so the mini pilgrimage, pretty much whenever you want. If you do it during the month of Ramadan, you get double the reward anyway, according to Islam. So the fact that like I had the opportunity to have that so close to home and be doing that kind of like what people dream about, going to do this, like, you know, once in their lifetime, having saved up all their money. I thought we were extremely blessed by God to have been, you know, located so close to the holy city. But because religion is so predominant in your life, like you hear the call to prayer 5 times a day, you have to wear an abaya, women and men are kind of segregated anyway, you get all the Islamic holidays, the timings during Ramadan flip in both the UAE and Saudi. So religion was so like part and parcel of my like general life that I didn't feel the need to kind of like profess it, you know, all the time. Or so I was becoming more and more liberal in Saudi because I went to such an international school and I met people from all around the world. Like I heard about religions that I'd never heard of before, you know, these communities in Lebanon, these mountainous communities who like have a mixture of Islamic and Christian beliefs. I'd never heard of like these kind of different offshoots. And then I saw how even within my own school, my Shia friends would really play down the fact that they were Shia because we were living in Saudi Arabia, which doesn't look upon Shias too well. So I was seeing these little things, and it was kind of making me believe more that religion is such a personal thing between me and my God. So I was never of the conviction that if I do, you know, if I make friends with a Christian or something, that I'm going to burn in hell forever. I didn't think that the God I believed in was capable of that. I thought he was a lot more merciful. But the word in the Quran, that the word associated with God many times as well, is the most gracious and most merciful. So I think I'd kind of like hang on to that angle more. So I would pray, like I wouldn't pray 5 times a day, but I would pray like the prayer on Friday, Jummah, which is considered a bit more important than the regular ones. And I'd fast, and, you know, I believed it wholeheartedly. I had read the Quran already by then, twice in Arabic, and then I tried to read it a bit in English. But so I'd pretty much say I was internally like a liberal Muslim, but the conviction for Islam and Allah and the message being true was always there. And the closeness to Saudi Arabia and living in a Muslim country at that time, it really kind of like, you know, it contributed to my experience confirming and believing fully that I am a part of this. This is my religion. This is the best and only true religion.
Okay, and you said you were wearing the hijab by 9, but in my understanding, it's not required until a girl hits puberty. Is that correct?
So yeah, theoretically, yes, but there's a lot of references in the Islamic scripture to like the turning point in a girl and a man, and a girl and a boy's life, and a girl, especially because if you look at one of the stories of the Hadith and the Prophet's life, he actually married Aisha, his youngest wife, at 6 years old and consummated the marriage at 9. So by 9, even back then, they thought that was the age of puberty, and when you should start to pray, you should start to fast, and therefore you should start to cover up your body and adorn the hijab. So when I did that at 9 as well, even according to the mosque classes I was going in and my own Islamic teacher, there was never any pushback. You know, there was never it's not yet. It's actually once you've properly hit puberty and, you know, you started to menstruate and you've gone through that and your body's changed. There was none of that. It was like 9 years old. Yeah, that's a good time. The only pushback, like I said, was actually from my family who were genuinely more concerned because, as I said, I was going to school in England, growing up here. I was really sporty as well. so I'd like to play football. I was quite athletic, and obviously the hijab, there's like some health and safety issues with that as well. So I think that's kind of more where my like parental concern was coming from. But nobody, according to Islamic scripture, would ever turn away a 9-year-old from wearing hijab. In Muslim countries, we see girls as young as 4 years old having the whole hijab put on them. And that's like literally in Pakistan, you see celebrities who post pictures of their like almost newborn and 1-year-old, children, like in the early stages. And you'll still see comments saying, if they're wearing a dress with like, those frilly socks that babies wear, you'll see comments of people saying, oh, like, astaghfirullah, why don't you cover her up from now? It's a good way to, ensure that she's pious for the rest of her life. And they start putting these prescriptions and this hypersexualization of girls from such a young age. Yeah, literally. And it's all sanctioned because there's no actual their concept of puberty and how we understand it today is just not applied in the same way. So a 9-year-old wearing a hijab is absolutely fine. In fact, it's 9 is a specific number in Islam where things change.
Right. And so there was nobody pressured you to do it. Like you said, your family was concerned, so they didn't force you to do it. This was your own personal choice.
Yeah, because I was going to the classes and I was like learning the Quran and learning, what the Islamic like prescriptions are and how to be a good Muslim girl at the time. This was all part and parcel of it. So I thought, if this is God's command, then yeah, why not? Like, I was actually shocked, as I said, why other people weren't doing it.
Okay. And you mentioned Pakistan. So I actually worked in Pakistan in 2018, and I was actually shocked there that the openness, that there were some women that weren't wearing it at all. There were some women that were wearing the hijab, and there were some women that were wearing the full face covering. So Pakistan seemed to be much more tolerant of choice there from what I observed, that there were, even on the billboards, like there's women on billboards with makeup and, no hijab at all. So it seems to be much more of a choice that it's provided there, where in Saudi, like the women don't have a choice at all. So what was your experience?
Yeah, no, completely. I agree in the sense that, like, on the surface, because the Pakistani culture is a lot more, when you talk about all these Islamic prescriptions, they've almost been like placed on Pakistan through Islam, obviously, and trying to stay within, the prescriptions of Islam. But the actual culture of Pakistan, obviously, it's intertwined quite heavily with Indian culture and the Hindu culture. So some of our actual wedding festivities as well, the ones we do prior to the actual main event, those are actually rooted purely in Hindu culture, but they're all colorful, and that's where all the kind of fun stuff happens, and we still carry that on. So there is a huge clash in Pakistan, almost, because you have all these Islamic prescriptions, and that's what you're meant to be, and you're meant to be covering up, and you're meant to be more subdued in society. But according to Pakistani culture, like the Pakistani fashion and our music and the artists who choose to express themselves, and just this whole idea of like beauty parlors and all of it's trying to have that modern push. So girls there are like women and girls everywhere else, that they like to dress up, they like to express themselves, they like to wear the latest fashion, and it's obviously not as restricted as Saudi Arabia, for example, where honestly, even as a young girl, I understand like the because you have these, like, even if you're 9, 8 years old, you need to wear an abaya, right? Regardless, even as a young girl, like as soon as, that's not even a 9-year-old thing. I think if a girl there is probably about, anything after 6, it's kind of looked down on if you're not wearing an abaya. You stand out. So even going around shopping malls at like the young age of like 10, 11, if this much of your ankle shows from an abaya, you'll start getting men who follow you around these malls, and there's no women around, like there's no women to be seen. You have to rely on another man and a security guard in a shop to try and get like some safety, or say that you're being followed. And again, the only person driving you back to your house is a man, because women can't drive. And you just don't see women in like the landscape of the horizon of society in general. You don't see these posters, you don't see women in ads. If you do, they're just the fully covered subservient housewife type that the image that Islam portrays. But again, even with Pakistan, like it looks all, well and good on the surface, and that there are, there are less restrictions for women and there's slightly more freedom and they're trying to express their culture. But if you look at a lot of like the media and the things on TV and the dramas and the movies, it's all, I mean, it still represents those same values. You'll see that time and time again. It's the same storylines. It's the same misogyny. It's the same impositions on women. It's the same honor-based violence issues. And these are just constantly fed to society. So there is a heavy, heavy sense of conservatism within specifically the older generation there. So I think there is always that clash. But yeah, definitely it's nothing like Saudi Arabia, where, you barely see women. They're almost erased from society itself.
Right. And my friends that I
ask you as well. Sorry, Jason, because I know you worked in Pakistan. That was really interesting for me to hear. So just a quick rundown, if you can, of your experience there and how it was, because I mean, obviously you're an atheist, you're a free thinker, and then you go to a country which is, I mean, it's the Islamic Republic, and obviously you even if you're not out there speaking your mind, 24/7, just like a general climate, did you feel this kind of sense of suffocation and hush-hushedness, or were you okay?
Not really. No, I didn't feel threatened at all anytime I was there. I really enjoyed the food.
Oh my God, yeah, we do have awesome food. Where were you? If you don't mind me asking, if you could.
I was in Lahore for the first month, and then I was in Karachi for about 7 or 8 months.
Okay.
So
did you go to Food Street in Lahore?
Oh yeah, I have pictures. Yeah.
Yeah. You didn't get a dodgy stomach.
Was it tawa chicken? I really miss tawa chicken. It was so
chicken.
good. And I remember my colleagues took me out for like the street food, and the people are always concerned. Oh, it's like, he lives in Thailand, he'll be fine. He's eating street food. So.
Yeah, because that's what I was wondering. Otherwise, it's usually a recipe for disaster. But oh my gosh, the food is incredible. It really is.
Yeah, I miss nihari. Nihari was my favorite dish. It was just, I'm craving it all the time. So.
Oh my gosh, have you found anywhere in Thailand that does?
No, there's a lot of Indian restaurants here, but apparently I think it's called pala in Hindu, or in one of the southern Indian dialects. So it's similar dish, but just a different name. So maybe I can find it. So,
yeah. And
so
when you don't have anything, there's always tom yum goong to go with. I love that.
Oh yeah, Thai food is great. But my experience was interesting. Like when I was in Lahore, so back in 2016, I went to what is now Humanist International. I went to their Asian conference in Taipei. And I met one of the visitors was a Pakistani gentleman who had come to the conference in Taiwan, and so we hooked up on Facebook and friends, and then I was in Lahore, and I said, hey, I'm working in Lahore. I said, by the way, do you happen to be in Lahore or close by? He goes, yeah, I'm about an hour or two away. So he came to visit me, and he brought a friend as well, and we went out for dinner, and. Well, that was the night that freedom really crystallized for me, because this was less than a year after that. There was a university student that was dragged out of his dorm and beaten to death.
Khan, yeah.
Yeah, that was at some point in 2017. So this was like less than a year after that. And so, we met at a Humanist International conference, and we're discussing humanist issues and being an atheist, and we're in a public restaurant. And of course, we're talking very quietly in hushed tones so that people around us don't hear us. And I thought, and that's when freedom really came home to me, that just having this discussion could either get us arrested or dragged into the street and beaten to death. And that's, all these whiners, these Christian evangelicals who are whining about Christmas. Oh, I can't say Merry Christmas, and my freedoms are being, trampled. It's like, you don't know what freedom is, like this. There are people living in parts of the world that can be executed for having a thought. So
yeah, touche. So that was like the moment where you were like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous that I'm having to speak in like hushed tones, and the consequence of this could be death just by discussing an injustice like that. Yeah.
But I wasn't really hiding with anybody. Like the people I was associating with were all, a lot of them had master's degrees, had all worked in international banking and finance, and had worked abroad. And so the people I was associating with were all fairly worldly and had been exposed. And, so I'd never hid anything from them. And it was the response from them was actually quite interesting, that they were actually quite intrigued and, wanted to know more. Like, oh, can you tell me more? Like, oh, this is really interesting. I do remember one guy, a Muslim, who got really pissed off at me. Well, not really pissed off, but
Yeah.
he was talking, we were talking about, oh, all this is in the Quran. Islam invented this and Islam invented that. And he said something about how the doomsday scenario, like the end times battle between God and Satan is a Muslim thing. I went, no, it's not. He's like, yes, it is. No, it isn't. I said, the book of Revelation, which precedes Islam by like 500 years, tells this story. And they got it from the Zoroastrians, which is 2,000 years earlier. So don't tell me. And he's like, well, you shouldn't say things that insult my faith. And I went, why not? It's not against the law. He's like, well, it should be. And I went, and that's the problem.
And in a lot of places it is.
Yeah.
You'd be happy to know. My goodness. Yeah. So again, like conversation like that. But so you're brave, because if I sense that like level of anger in it, I would, because a lot of them just don't know their own history, and the fact that these, like, what is actually entailed in the scriptures that came before, or like the stories in the Quran where they've been picked up from and plagiarized from and kind of chopped and changed a little bit. So they are genuinely like, they're certain in their conviction, and what you're saying is genuinely like hurting their deepest sentiments. And thankfully these, he just made a comment about it, like the law should be on his side. But I mean, even yesterday we saw, not yesterday, but a few days ago now, what's happened in Pakistan recently with the Sri Lankan man being, and he was actually like burnt alive after that. And these are normal Pakistanis who do this. So they've just been riled up already by, like, the right-wing Islamic Party that's operating in Pakistan, which was just recently prescribed. It was proscribed by the government, and they just kind of like made them an ally again and struck a deal with them. But it just takes a few people who just think a bit differently and feel like their feelings have been hurt that extra bit more to cause absolute havoc, and they fully believe it's justified. And the people who carry it out are hailed as, heroes. Like, there was a man taking a selfie with the burning body. That is how deranged the mentality of these people are now. And I strongly believe, obviously, in countries like this where, the blasphemy law is at play, it is a combination of so many things, but particularly a lack of education, ignorance, and poverty. These three things just breed an extremist mindset. And then you've got verses like these, the TLP, the party that's, directly responsible for radicalizing the majority in Pakistan right now, they've picked out some crazy obscure hadiths, and they've made these like videos, almost like war propaganda, with their chief like speaking this hadith out loud, and they've played some hardcore like music from one of these Turkish series depicting like the Ottoman conquests of which, by the way, is not even Islamic at that point, but they've just taken whatever they want and they've kind of meshed it into this video, and it's circulating, and people are using this for inspiration, and they're getting really riled up. So yeah, I mean, just back to it, it's obviously nice, whenever you can have these conversations, you can move the discussion along a bit. But I mean, in my experience, it takes that one person to get that little bit more pissed off, and it's a whole different ball game.
Yeah. Well, one of my friends, when I was there, was telling me that Pakistan used to be quite a tolerant place. It was only in the 80s with al-Haq that he started weaponizing Islam as a way to legitimize his regime, and that's when Pakistan really started radicalizing. That prior to that, it was actually quite cosmopolitan. So it's only been, like, say, the last 30, 40 years that it's become this way. So, which is a bit odd that, it hasn't reverted back to what it was before, because, it's been, 30 years since he's been out of office.
Yeah, well, as you said, right? I mean, because when Zia al-Haq came, and then these hudud, like the most strictest Islamic punishments, came back into law and were canonized, the problem is now that, like, the separation of like politics and state and religion has become so difficult, and you've got so many of these fundamentalists who are actually in government themselves. You've got them sitting at the top of the judiciary. So these people are literally a judge, which is meant to be an impartial judge working for, the public good in a sense, because these are literally these are public interest cases where the whole country is looking to see how these, like in the Mashal Khan incident, how these perpetrators are how they're tried and how they're punished according to the law. And when you see judges at the highest levels sympathizing and giving them bail and letting them off, and actually the people waiting outside the courtroom are ready with garlands of flowers and throwing him a party, you just see how skewed the problem is and how deep rooted it is. But yeah, I don't know, Pakistan is it's just
But it was the judiciary that finally acquitted Asia Bibi, right? They're the ones who decided that she didn't let her go, and then all the hatred that incited in the protests. So.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that was so much of it is down to international pressure as well. That's when they really, have to do something. And she was obviously granted asylum by a number of countries. She was offered asylum anyway. But again, it's so. I mean, this happens. There's Asia Bibi cases every single day. They just don't make it to the mainstream. And again, it's starting from similar shady circumstances, where it could be a tiny personal vendetta. It could be that you didn't like something that your neighbor did. And not everybody is as lucky as Asia Bibi. And the lawyers that fight for these people also are faced with they are taking on the entire country when they choose to defend these women from minorities or anybody from a minority that's been charged with blasphemy. But yeah, it's
wasn't the governor of Lahore executed by his own bodyguard for defending someone in a blasphemy case?
Yeah, exactly. A state-given bodyguard that was meant to be protecting him turned on him himself. So you're not safe from the people around you. Whether it's the driver who's driving you to and from your office. That's why I'm saying the mentality now has you genuinely. I think the general consensus in Pakistan is that if for normal average citizen is that if somebody talks about religion, just keep your mouth shut or just walk away from the situation, because that's how dangerous things are now. Even if I was a Muslim and there was another fellow Muslim in front of me, if I had a slight difference or a point of contention, that could turn into, if the person wanted to take it far enough, my life could be over. So I think that the general MO for people there is just do not bring up religion, don't talk about it. It's turning into a very, very fascist kind of just extreme ideology. It's just breeding such ideological hatred. It's very sad to see it going down the pan.
Yeah. My friends are telling me that it's a minority though, that the majority of Pakistanis don't do this. It's mainly some of the very poor and illiterate that have been brainwashed. But I never encountered any hostility from it. One guy actually came up and shook my hand. I was walking into my hotel in Lahore, and this guy just walked up and shook my hand. I think he was just happy to see that what was the Gora was what my boss always called me. He used to call me Gora.
Always happy to see a Gora.
It's just somebody was somebody who's not afraid to come here, and so I never encountered no one ever exhibited any hostility towards me when I was there. So I think they're just happy to see people.
Yeah, no, for sure. Tourism to see Goras, they absolutely love it. And even Imran Khan kind of weaponizes that, because whenever there is a vlogger or an influencer from a Western background and they come and see the nice parts of Pakistan and they take a video and they say, I haven't been asked to pay for anything, everyone here is so sweet, he really pushes that propaganda. It's look, our country is so good and it's so safe for tourists and Goras come here. But yeah, you're right. But for the average Pakistani woman, that country is not safe at all. And again, you're saying women are freer. There's posters, there's things like that. Society is, even where I had my house in Lahore, girls are wearing jeans and tops. It's you could be in London or something. They weren't even wearing the traditional dress. But having said that, 2 alleys down, a woman in full clad like burqa would still be sexually harassed or touched up by somebody on a motorbike or a rickshaw driver or whatever the situation is. Like, women face this every single day in Pakistan. So, but you're right. The majority of like people in Pakistan just want to live a good life. They just want to be able to go to work, live a fulfilled life, have food on the table, provide for their family, have access to good education. But this spread of like this lack of separation and this rhetoric by Imran Khan, like this, you know, reviving the state of Medina and trying to be the kind of savior of like the Muslim ummah in the Muslim world, and trying to partner up with Turkey and kind of rewrite history and show this, you know, proper Islamic like initiation of how Pakistan came about and Muslim conquest and the life of the Prophet. He really has like added fuel to the fire that, you know, this cancer of Islam that is spreading through Pakistan. He has definitely not done it any favors to kind of say, right, this is a separate issue and we're going to treat this separately. And I mean, a lot of people had high hopes. I had really high hopes for him. Maybe it was just naive, but thinking he had spent time in the West. He had, you know, he'd been educated at Oxford. He kept talking about this new Pakistan that, you know, a new Pakistan that the youth would grow up in. But I think he's shattered a lot of people's hopes, because he's just U-turned at so many levels, and now he's gotten into bed with the TLP, which is the Islamic Fascist Party of Pakistan. And then we saw the incident that we just discussed. And it's just sad because it's so abhorrent and it like literally shakes you to the core, but it's not surprising. Which is the saddest thing. It's just not surprising. They've just fostered this hostile environment. And most people, even when I read Twitter, like the average Pakistani is like, if only I could get out of here. This place is just, we've had things like the Women's March. We've had even like protests, you know, that My Body, My Choice. The backlash that women got for saying a simple phrase as my body, my choice. Don't touch me without my permission. Don't harass me. Don't impose these gender roles on me. All of that's deemed un-Islamic. And these are basic human rights we're talking about. So in a country like this, the problems are at such a grassroots level. Sorry, I just find it so toxic to talk about that country sometimes. I'm like, where do we begin?
Well, it's kind of a weird dichotomy that, you know, you have this culture where women are supposed to be covered up because they're supposed to be chaste and pure, and yet there's all this sexual harassment going on. It's a weird sort of balance. So
yeah,
I remember
exactly. And again, it's just the restrictions, right? The repressiveness as well does not help. Yeah, sorry,
and
you're
I
saying?
remember that the gym that I went to had a pool, and because like swimming is like my one cardio workout. And I remember they had segregated times for men and women in the pool. And I'm thinking, well, how about you just join the 21st century and just learn how to coexist, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, like, I mean, sometimes this, again, is purely from a woman's perspective, because, I mean, for me, I actually enjoyed that when I was growing up in the Middle East. I was like, oh, this is so nice. There's like, when I'd go to a spa, like the sauna and steam room, it's just women's only. But I only enjoyed that because I'm like, oh, I can just relax here and not worry about, you know, if there's like a creepy man in here, or, you know, if I like just knowing that I could chill out in peace because of the low expectations of the men that would be allowed in. But coming now I'm in the UK, I go to the gym all the time and it's absolutely fine. And you just think to yourself, oh my gosh, is that just because you're so conditioned to think that these men are just going to behave in a certain way because that's what you've seen? And then you come here and you realize it's all fine. Everyone is just getting on with their swimming, their jacuzzi, their sauna, whatever it is. There's women in bikinis, there's women in burkinis, there's men in shorts, there's men in Speedos. Everyone's doing okay.
Yeah, it is a bit weird. So you were mentioning when you were in Saudi. So like I was in Saudi as well. My dad worked there in the 80s, and I spent some time in Jeddah. I remember when for him to even go to Mecca, he needed like special permission because he was a technical guy there working with on the telecom system. And he needed like special permission as a non-Muslim to even get there. So
Yeah, we have a bridge. So like when you go, it's like the road. I'm sure your dad would have seen it, but it's like non-Muslims that way and Muslims that way towards Mecca. That the road actually like separates.
Yeah. So how many times did you get there to Mecca when you lived there?
I went a good number of times. Like I couldn't even remember because it was that many. We used to go quite often. So we have Hajj, which is the pilgrimage that you're meant to do once in your lifetime. It's like one of the pillars of Islam, which happens in Mecca and Medina, and you go to a few other places. But the smaller version of that is called Umrah, which you can do pretty much any time. So we did that loads, and I remember, as I was saying, if you do Umrah in the holy month of Ramadan, it's equivalent to the reward of doing Hajj. So as a young child, I was like, this is brilliant. Does this mean I don't have to do Hajj in my life? Because this is the equivalent. And so many people around the world apply for visas and all of this just to get to Mecca during Ramadan. And for me, I was like, I can literally like wear fresh pajamas, put an abaya, go do Umrah and come home. Like this is absolutely brilliant. So yeah, I went a good number of times, and I went with my grandparents as well when they came over, and for them it was more of a big deal because they don't live in Saudi Arabia. And I remember seeing like my granddad's reaction when he laid his eyes on the Kaaba for like after so long, and he started tearing up, and I was like, oh, am I supposed to cry as well? Because I'm meant to be feeling this like insane sense of like, I don't know, spiritual union or connection to my God, but I wasn't able to cry in the same way he was. But as a child, I was watching him and trying to like absorb his awe and make it my own.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, and there's also, because we lived in Saudi Arabia, you could go to like, according to them, what the Islamic story is, but it's called ziyarat, where you go and you see the places that the Prophet has like historical references to. So they took us to the Hira cave where he apparently was meditating in when the angel Gabriel came to him, and where the spiders kind of made a web, and that saved him from the Kafir of Mecca, the non-believers of Mecca who were looking to track him down. So I went to all of these places, and obviously this was, at the time I thought, Saudi is just the holy land. So I have really, really kind of like strong memories of all of these places in Saudi Arabia. And then when I looked into Islam, I was kind of just like, oh my God, there's so many questions about so many things. Even like when you are in Mecca and you're seeing, like one part of it is to kind of throw rocks at pillars, which represent Satan. And, talking about sexual harassment as well, like walking around the Kaaba in Mecca, you're a young girl and you're like, this is the holiest place, but you're hearing about people's shoes being stolen outside. There's sexual harassment going on in the Kaaba itself. Like there's unspoken rules, right? Like if your shoe slips off, definitely don't bend down to pick it up, because you will just be like, people are walking around so fast, you'll be squashed, you'll be trampled, you'll be, touched up, and you're in an abaya and you're a young girl, but you do see as well people like genuinely kind of push against you, and there's so much happening there. You feel so uncomfortable at certain times, but you feel like you can't speak up as well because you're in the house of God, you're in the holiest place. And all of this stuff is still happening. So you do you internalize all these experiences you have as a child, but that's just it doesn't stop when even in the holy city, in the holiest city, there's still theft and sexual harassment and all these things.
So that just exposes the hypocrisy of religion, right?
Yeah, 100%. And even now, like when you look at what Saudi's doing in Mecca, when I used to go, that they still kind of gave more credence to that area where the Kaaba is located and the mosque is. But then soon after, they've kind of built this Rolex tower. They're knocking down all the historical sites which I kind of visited. Now they're all going to go, and they're putting up these like 5-star hotels, and they're fully commercializing it. So I don't know how much they care about their own history, or they're worried that the archaeology doesn't match up, or it's not going to stand the test of time. They don't allow Western academics to come in and have a gander around. So it's all crazy.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier in the chat about how like the sort of the history of Islam, when you started looking into it, and you mentioned the Kaaba, which according to the Quran was built by Abraham and Ishmael, even though it predated Islam. It was a holy site in the ancient pantheon of the Arabian Arabian gods, and yet it gets reappropriated into Islam, and apparently, Abraham and Ishmael build it. So, and lots of other Judeo-Christian things that you mentioned, Gabriel, which is also comes from the Jewish Bible. So what actually started? You said there was an event that happened that made you start questioning. So, are you comfortable talking about what that was?
Yeah, I'm definitely happy to touch on it. So yeah, basically, when I lived in Dubai after I finished uni, and I kind of went back to live in the UAE as an adult, still like a fully believing Muslim, I got married, and it kind of fell apart really fast. There was just like emotional abuse and financial abuse, and like some underlying personality disorders, which I honestly had no clue about. I wasn't even educated about. So it was only like in a moment of being absolutely stumped that I Googled like, what was said to me. And then I just saw articles and articles on like what this behavior is and what it does to you. And like the fact that I'm not crazy, that I didn't hear this one way. Like my mind is, I'm not losing my sanity basically, because they make you really kind of question your own reality. So then I was like, oh my days, okay, this is really bad. And all these things were kind of kept from me, that the true nature of his character, these potential like, mental health issues. So when I tried to, go about the UAE legal system and a normal way of kind of getting a divorce, essentially it kind of turned messy because he refused to give me the divorce. But that's what was the catalyst to make me look into all of this and effectively like change the course of my life. Because in the process of me trying to attain a divorce, or even just open up a divorce from the courts itself, you have to go through like these like levels of family counseling, which is really Islamic heavy as well. They keep asking you about how close you are to God and how many times a day you pray, and if you and your partner are pious. And I'm trying to tell them that like it's a very like abusive relationship. I fear for my life, which was why I've moved back to my father's house. But they keep encouraging you to meet up and go for coffee, and I was like, I genuinely like don't want to, and I don't feel safe. And he's kind of flipping it and saying that I'm possessed, because in Islam that whole concept of like having black magic done to you, or having a jinn or a devil possess you to make you not think straight, he was using that angle. And so when I was already like trying to prove to myself that I'm not like going crazy with him trying to say that, oh, I said this, and I was like, no, you completely didn't, and he was like messing with that reality, then to further in front of this like Emirati imam to say, oh, she's crazy and she's possessed, and he's actually buying this argument. And I was like, I just want a divorce. Like, how hard is that to fathom? So then they buy so much time to like, let these arguments kind of play out, and thinking that you'll just give up and you'll go back to your husband. So when I didn't let this stuff get to me, and I was kind of like, I was going through all the motions, and I was showing up, and I was wearing my abaya, and I was just, nodding my head, and I was like, yeah, I'll try and pray more, whatever, to help this situation, but I still want that divorce. So eventually when I found a new job, and I was settling into life, and I was like living with my parents again, I got a call from the police, and they essentially were using this divorce case and flipping it to add this ancient Sharia law, which I'd never heard of. But he just said to me, it's called Da Zawjiyya in Arabic. And I was like, I don't know what that is. I've never heard of it. And he said, basically, we can, we will, if you don't go back to your husband's house or your marital home, we can arrest you and take you back there, and you're not allowed to leave the house without his permission. And obviously, to my like more international brain that's had like a British education, and I'd studied law at uni, I was like, how is kidnap and holding me hostage against my will ever going to be sanctioned by a judge? Like, nobody would allow this. This is crazy. And obviously my parents thought the same way. We just didn't think this was plausible. Like, why should you have to go back to a place where you genuinely fear for your life? And even in Islam, I thought I was very much sheltered under the concept of, as a woman, I've now realized in Islam, you're nothing but property. So if I wasn't my husband's, I've now gone back to my father, which is like the mahram in Islam. So your guardian. So I was like, I'm back with my father. I have a mahram. So how can you force me away from one guardian to another when my actual father is saying, I won't let her go back? But over there you can. So this is an ancient Sharia law that I think is it's phased out in most countries, but some countries in the MENA region, like Egypt, namely, still kind of really hold their legal qadis and the judges really hold discussions about what the word da'a means and stuff. This is all derived from the Quranic verse saying if you fear disobedience from your wife, not even if she is disobedient, but if you fear disobedience from her, then obviously, you admonish her, you separate her from the bed, and then you have the right to beat her. But they've made this, obviously in the law, they've used the word, if you fear disobedience, the recourse for that is literally, we can arrest you and force you to go back because you're a disobedient wife and you need to go back to your rightful owner. So when things got really, really serious in terms of like this, when I couldn't fight this off with a simple divorce case, that's when I really realized that, even the police here are going to stump a woman's right because they're so adamant that, the police themselves were so, I can't tell you like the experiences I had in the police station, because I started just getting calls like at like 10 p.m. on a weekend. And there are certain unspoken rules in the UAE. So because I was living again in my father's house, and I thought that, they have you're not allowed to invade anyone's privacy, but my ex-husband was like stalking my house for like months and I didn't know. He was stalking me going back and forth from work. So he'd found our new house and where we'd lived. He was like kind of sending people to like zoom in and take videos of me, just really, really weird things. And I thought all of this would actually come out in court. But then when it got to the point where they actually just were trying to charge me for absolutely anything to get me to come to the police station. And the final straw was when they asked for, I was having a birthday gathering at my house, like months after all of this was happening. And I had a bunch of friends over, and that's when 4 policemen showed up to my house. And they literally checked my friends' IDs, and they just took one of them and said, "Go coming to the station with us." And then they tried to take me. And I saw the 4 policemen, and I'd studied a bit of Islamic law at university, obviously still with a Muslim mind though. And I was like, 4 witnesses, I know what they're trying to charge me for here. They're going to they'd already tried to put so many other charges on me, which I was refusing to go to the police station and hand over my passport for, because they weren't serious enough for me to give my passport. So for this one, they could take my passport away and just like lock us up indefinitely. Because I've heard of cases in the UAE, where, even Brits get lost in their system, and you need to appeal to the government to try and help you because the cases are that ludicrous. Speaking of that, there's just a case recently where a Brit was going to be sentenced to 25 years for having an empty bottle of CBD oil in his car, which didn't even belong to him, it belonged to his friend. And now they've reduced it to 10 years, and his family here in the UK is pleading for the government to help. So anyway, I'd heard of a lot of these cases, and I was like, I do not want to get in this situation. I know what these like desert prisons are like, but this is the power of, if you have a bitter ex-partner or somebody who doesn't want to give you a divorce or doesn't want to play by the rules and play by the system, if they couple up with a conniving lawyer, it's a man's world out there. So when I realized that, okay, now they're going to try and frame me for adultery, and they're going to ask for me to hand over my passport, I literally called the British embassy when I had honestly given up all hope, and I was like, they're not going to leave me alone until I hand it in. So I went to the station to hand it in, but at the last minute, thankfully, I made a call to the emergency British consulate in Dubai. And I just told them the whole thing. And I was like, look, I'm trying to file for divorce. All of this is happening in the meantime. He's been stalking me, harassing me. I've gone to the police. I've showed them evidence. They're not doing anything. In fact, it's the opposite now, and they're trying to frame me for adultery. So I just want you guys to know that I'm here and I'm at this station in case, you don't hear from me. Because again, when I was in there all those times before, it was just male men, and they would just sit there. And honestly, they would just literally try to flirt. They would just sit back. Then another officer would come in. They'd pass me to another one. I'd sit with another one for an hour, hours of my life just. And nobody was so much as writing anything I was saying. They're like, but why is this happening? Just weird. It was horrible. I tried to go with friends of mine that were guys whenever I could. I tried to go with my brother or my dad whenever I could, and I'd always go really respectfully in an abaya. I'd be as respectful as possible, but it was getting to the point where it was extremely intimidating and extremely unprofessional. So anyway, long story short, this angel of a human being said to me on the phone, he was like, look, I can't give you any legal advice, but big but that you know what Sharia law can do to you if you're charged with something like adultery. So just literally come back to the UK right now. If you still have your passport in your hand, like, don't hand it over. Just get a flight back here to where you have rights. And these, because I told him all the cases they were trying to put on me, and he's like, just come back here to where these aren't even issues. Like, this is ridiculous. And I was like, okay. And I literally just packed a number of things and I went straight to the airport. And the police wanted to put a travel ban on me as well, because that's when they actually ask for your passport and you don't give it, they can put a travel ban on you, and then you're effectively held hostage in that country. So I had a couple of hours to get out, and I just took the first flight to Baku, and then from Baku back to the UK. And oh my God, you know how you had your moment of when you realized what freedom meant when you were having that conversation after the Mashal Khan incident? This was when I realized what freedom meant. When I touched back down onto like UK soil, I was just like, oh my goodness, what was that? So yeah, essentially that's what happened. And again, even in that point, going through the motions, I never once kind of like shot Islam in the foot or thought this had anything to do with Islam. I just thought this is men who are really abusing their power, and they're all on power trips, and they just kind of want to deny a woman of her basic rights, and they are weaponizing religion in order to do so. So obviously when I came back, I was really, really distraught. It took me a couple of months to really like sit down and get to grips with what had happened. I was so traumatized with like police sirens that even in England, I thought the police like here were coming to get me. So I had to go to like therapy for PTSD, which really helped, because after that, then I was like, right, now I'm in England, and people, when I tell them like my life story or whatever, they're clearly going to blame Islam for this. And because I'm still a Muslim, I need to find a way to convince myself so I can convince them that this is not what Islam mandates for women. This is just men doing, just acting in the nastiest way possible. And that's when I started looking into it. I was like, okay, now I'm good. Now my mind's okay again. I've like come to terms with everything. What is Taha Zawjiyya and where does it come from? And I'd studied Islamic law at uni, so I knew obviously Sharia is technically derived directly from the Quran. Like that's where most of the law, it comes from, like these verses. So as soon as I saw Taha Zawjiyya and it's talking all about the disobedience of a wife, I went straight back to where does this notion of obedience come from, and who determines what's obedient and what's not, and why do we have to be obedient, like at the expense of your life, or living with an abusive partner, like how obedient? And that's when I just started reading the Quran, and I read every single English translation of the verses, and that's kind of like when my world shattered. And I was like, wow.
Well, at least it did. You didn't get trapped inside it, and you had the courage to leave. So,
yeah, I mean, there comes a point where there's only so much cognitive dissonance one can harbor. You, at the end of the day, like you read something and you have to trust your eyes and what you're seeing and what your mind is telling you that means, and you have to make a decision either way. I was long beyond the point of like clinging to the nice rosy aspects of Islam, because by then I had kind of gone down the more, I knew there were problems with some elements of Islam anyway, but I never with the concept of like Allah or in terms of like whether that truth claim. I delved more into like Sufism, and I kept reading like Rumi and all the more esoteric Islamic theologians, and kind of profess more like God is love is God, and it's between you and your God, whatever you do. So I was never like strict in the sense that I'd still like, I would never eat like pork or all of that, but I wouldn't think that if somebody does one thing wrong that they're destined for hell, or that if I had gay friends that they're going to burn in hell forever. I started to think that was wrong. Like they can't be burned forever, eternally. But deep down somewhere, I thought, the way they're living is wrong because my God says it's wrong, but God won't punish them forever. So I was already kind of like making, my own rationale of how to live in the 21st century with the group of people I'm acquainted with and hold on to my beliefs. So I was a lot more like into the Sufi thing, but this whole scenario and then reading the Quran in English, I went straight to like, is Islam even true? Is any of this true? Like, where does this all come from? Who? Because when I read the Quran in English, it just became so obvious to me. I think it was also reading it with an adult mind, because I had tried to read it when I was about 15, 16. There's the night where the Prophet supposedly was taken on a winged horse type animal to heaven and the furthest mosque, in Jerusalem. So I was on that night. It was a really like holy night, and the whole of the UAE had a holiday. So I sat with the Quran, and I was like, today I'm really going to get to grips with this and see what this says. And I was so ready to be blown away. And I think it was like some really hard, weird translation of English. It was almost like, it was even harder than Shakespearean English. And I was trying to understand the Quran, and I opened it, and it was just like jumping, and it was like threats of hell. And then I was really interested in like King Solomon and Queen Sheba's story in there, and Alexander the Great. And I'd go and I'd try and validate what I read in the Quran with like a documentary, and there was no correlation. And I was like, what's going on? Is God not retelling the story correctly, or does God just think Alexander the Great was a Muslim? I couldn't get it. But then like I just gave up, and I just carried on, being a Muslim anyway in my heart and mind. But I just thought maybe the Quran is so enigmatic and so mystical and so thingy that it's just not for like a lay mind like mine to understand. But then as an adult, opening it up and reading it in English, I literally was like, how do people read this in their native language and pray and recite this? How?
Yeah. Well, you're an ex-Muslim now, but if you're still interested in some of the history of Islam, I would recommend the new Cambridge History of Islam, which has some fascinating scholarly articles. And one of the most fascinating points that I came across says something like words like Quran and Surah aren't Arabic, they're Syriac. And it says, unlocking the Syriac Christian links to Islam helps to unlock so much of what Islam is.
Yeah, so. I know, because I think I read that as well the other day. Quran comes from Quran or something, which is like recitation or to recite. But this is, honestly, Jason, as good as you might, this is what fascinates me so much. And I think this really helped me to break down like the mainstream narrative that we have of Islam and like the bubble that they're kept in. Because once you open yourself up to seeing these connections or seeing the origins or the root words or the origin myths, where they actually come from, and you see how far back it goes. Even like, the eye for an eye thing, and they're like, oh yeah, that's just a continuation of Mosaic law, but it goes all the way back to the Hammurabi Code. Like and it just gets so interesting, because these things actually dismantle the notion of Islam being like this beautiful thing in the 7th century that just there was nothing like it and there will never be anything after it. You realize it's exactly what it would be at its time. Based on everything that's come before it. So I'm really, really interested. I'll definitely check that out, because I think a lot of the videos I intend to make as well have a lot, because I'm naturally just more inclined towards history. Because even just my own natural curiosity drove me to like read about the slave trade that we were never taught about. And that was one of my first videos on my channel, when I was absolutely shocked that I was like, how does Islam claim that it's, it's not racist and that it freed slaves? Like, these are massive claims to make, but your sources and your history is so dark. And we're never taught that at school. We're taught about the transatlantic slave trade, and we're taught a lot more contemporary history. And then now, again, that's what I'm saying. The internet is a game changer. And I think, how Christianity has gone through its reformation, the internet is what's going to push Islam to the brink, because now they can't hide and they can't distort. Like, they've already started changing scriptures and adding brackets and kind of sanitizing words here and there, and trying to make it more palatable for 21st century audience, especially a Western audience. But every single ex-Muslim that speaks out, or every time we shine light on the history, or we retell a story from the narrative where you haven't omitted all the nasty, gory details of how the Prophet raided the village and looted the booty and all of that, you're just saying that there was a beautiful marriage at the end of it, and we're saying no. there was a genocide, the woman's brother, father, husband, everybody was killed, and she was forced to sleep with the prophet that night. How is that a marriage? So this counter narrative that's out there now, and the history and the academics that are looking into these things, even questioning the whole narrative about Mecca being a trading port at that time and being on any map, just the issue with the mosques all facing Petra, the issue with like the way the vegetation is described in the Quran, like all of these things now are just nicely like, just popping holes in Islam everywhere, really.
Yeah. I think it was in the book The Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan. I think he's the one who he mentioned about how the mosques all used to face, he said Jerusalem. I saw one other article that said Petra as well, but Petra and Jerusalem are close enough, that it's it could probably be either or. But he said that in a trying to suck up to the Quraysh in Mecca, that they changed the direction of prayer to there in the Kaaba to get the Quraysh on side. So it's, I make the point repeatedly that religion is entirely political, and the more you look at the history of things, the more you see all these political concessions, and there's political motivations behind many of the stories. So it's, he said, like, the more people look at the history, the more it falls apart. So, but most people don't look at the history, but those who are desperate to get out are looking at it. So,
yeah. True.
Okay, well, it's been about an hour that we've been chatting now. So, anything else you want to wrap up with, or we should maybe have another chat another time and keep going?
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. I know, obviously, I spoke a lot during this session, but I would love to host you on my channel, and we can kind of go into your life experiences in a bit more detail, and maybe even, your own kind of like understanding of things, because I think it's really interesting, the places that you've lived and the places that you've worked and the interactions that you've had. And clearly, if there's like a specific topic you want to dive into, then we can have a specific chat about that as well. But yeah, I think it's been a nice discussion, and I've really enjoyed talking to you, to be honest.
Yeah, you too. It's nice to meet an intelligent young woman who's studied law and has been in many places as well. So I wish I had met someone like you when I was in Lahore, so I could at least have some interesting conversations with people. So, of course, we might have raised some eyebrows. Yeah, I don't know how long I'd last there now. Yeah. We might have raised some eyebrows. People like, why are these together? So, okay. Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on the show. Once again, everybody, it's Nuriyah, who is the Holy Humanist, and we'll put the links in the description so you can check out her channel. And reminder to everyone, please like and subscribe, and we'll see everybody next week. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thanks for listening, and don't forget we're on YouTube, so follow us on YouTube. Just search for Atheist Alliance International, and please subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're also on all of your favourite podcast platforms, so make sure that you follow us on there as well. See you next time.